This morning, with your permission, I would like to start with some verses from Devi Mahatmya. As you, I'm sure, know, we are in the season of Chaitra Navratri, the spring Navratri, when we honor the divine as mother of the universe. And it's a very special period in our Hindu calendar. So I will recite a few verses from Devi Mahatmya in honor of the goddess. And I ask you to meditate on each verse with me. I will just signal the meaning, one of the words in each of these verses, beginning with Devi as Shakti, the creative Shakti of the divine. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Vishnu Mayeti Shabdita Namastasyai 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 Namo Nama, as consciousness in all beings. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Chetanetya Bhidhiyate Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha, as Shakti, as power in all beings. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Samstitha Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha, as forgiveness in all beings. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Kshanti Rupena Samstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha, as peace in all beings. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shanti Rupena Samstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha, as faith, Shraddha in all beings. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shraddha Rupena Samstitha Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha, as beauty in all beings. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Kanti Rupena Samstitha Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha, as compassion, as mercy in all beings. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Daya Rupena Samstitha Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha, as motherly love in all beings. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Matra Rupena Samstitha Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. And may the blessings of the Divine Mother be with all of you, all of us today, and with our families and with our world. This morning we will look at another narrative from the Upanishads, but I wanted to start by returning to our discussion last week, where we looked at a narrative from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. I am revisiting it because there was a very good question raised about my translation or my focus on prana as breath. And just for clarification, I would like to talk just for a couple of minutes on prana and to explain my translation. So prana, as a general term, let's start there, may be translated as, and all translations are inaccurate. There's no easy English equivalent for prana. But let's say prana as a general translation may be rendered as life force or life energy. The same energy, prana, is broken down in some of our sacred texts as having 5 expressions. One energy with multiple expressions. And these expressions point to different functions of this single energy. So when we speak of the pancha pranas or the 5 pranas, we are speaking about this life energy operative in a special way. So what are the 5 pranas, the pancha pranas? So in that list, the word prana is also used. So you have the general use of prana, but now it comes down to a very specific prana. So in that list, the first is again prana, which speaks generally to respiration or the breathing process centered in the lung and in the heart and so on. So prana, respiration, and then apana points to functions below the heart. Again, all of these are approximations, but the energy that helps in all kinds of elimination, excretion, excretory processes of the body are usually associated with apana. And then samana, literally samana means the equalizer, if you had to translate it literally, but it's associated with digestion, reducing everything to digestible material, digestion, the assimilation of food. And then vyana, again, if you translate literally, vyana means the one that pervades, identified with circulation, at least in some of the texts, circulation throughout the body. So in that sense, the word might be appropriate. And finally, there is Udana, described as functioning upwards from the soles of the feet to the head, associated with promoting growth. Some describe it as the energy that has its final expression in the separation from the body at the time of death, throwing out, a reversal process, ejection process. Now, these are 5 primary expressions of prana, but at the same time, they are not necessarily exhaustive. There may be even more expressions of this vital force than we are aware of. But this is a general classification that is used. Now, in the Upanishadic narrative that I shared last week, you will remember, the organs of the body, the sense organs of the body, they were all beginning to compete among each other to discern or to decide who is Vashishta, who is the most important. That it was a search for honor, for recognition, for prominence above all others. And so the different organs, as you recall, left the body. The body functioned not at all adequately. We should not think that if you don't have your sight or your hearing ability, that somehow you don't, your experience of the world is not in some senses diminished. But then when prana was about to leave, even before it left, all screamed out, please don't, because we can't live without you. And so prana was identified as the one without which the others could not exist in the body. And that point I said breath. Now, I translated prana there as breath because in the pancha pranas, the breathing process is in fact referred to as mukhya prana. So whatever the many expressions of prana are, mukhya prana is the inhalation of oxygen, which vitalizes all the other processes. So mukhya means the premier, the primary prana. So it is in that sense, I translated prana there as breath. But that does not mean that, I will not recognize, the multiple expressions of prana. But I think it's also accurate to identify prana in that context as breath. But if you wish also to read the narrative as speaking to prana in a more comprehensive sense, that's also fine and certainly a legitimate reading. In that sense, you may speak of the departure of all the vital energies, but because the other energies are dependent on mukhya prana, I identified it as breath. Breath is also the expression of prana that we experience most directly, most visibly. After I eat my meal, I'm not always aware of samana in my stomach or the other pranas operating, but certainly I know that when I can't breathe, it's a crisis. So I hope that helps to clarify the context in which I was speaking of prana as breath, or as I said, mukhya prana. So I did not venture into all of the details of prana. I emphasized prana as mukhya prana, since my purpose in telling that narrative was an ethical one. It was a moral purpose, basically to show that when there is an unhealthy rivalry, unhealthy competitiveness in the body. So here the physical body was used as the location for that rivalry, for that competitiveness, for that greed for prominence and importance. But my point was that wherever this happens, whether it is in the body of a family, in a community, in a corporation, in a nation, in a world, when members begin to assert their own importance, their own significance above that of others, then the well-being, the integrity of that unit, whether it's family, community, nation, corporation, is threatened. It's threatened. It becomes unhealthy. It is faced with death. The departure of breath was threatened the body with death. And then my second point also, so that was the first main point that I wanted to make. And my second point is that prana, even though it is vital to physical and mental functioning, it is not in fact the primary source of life. And in that case, I referenced several texts, including Kena Upanishad, that speaks of Atman, Brahman, as pranasya prana. So prana might indeed be the source of energy to the other organs in the body, but prana itself is dependent on a more ultimate source of sustenance. Itself is an effect. It's also dependent, ultimately dependent on that which is described as pranasya prana, the breath of breath, which is of course Brahman present in the body as Atman. It is because of that we see, we hear, we smell, we touch, we feel, we think. And then, of course, the final part of my discussion last week was to ask, how can we learn? How does thinking about using the metaphor of breath, prana as breath, to think about Brahman helps us understand Brahman better? What can we learn from that metaphor? And I made many points there, including the fact that, the atmosphere from which we draw our nourishment is one. We breathe from the same source. In that sense, we are all sustained by the same one infinite, invisible, non-material reality that exists in everything and exists in and sustains life in every human. Breath is also common to us all. So today I want to move to text. And because it's so closely related to the one that we studied and discussed last week, I thought it would be helpful that we do a similar narrative from the Upanishads. Those of you who who studied the Kena Upanishad some time ago, and I'm sure many of you might have read the text on your own, would be familiar with the one that I'm sharing today. But it's always fresh, it's always new, and it's always good to look at it again. We cannot exhaust all that we learn from these beautiful Upanishadic narratives. This one also is in the form of a story. So I'll tell the story briefly, and then we could contemplate together on what it means in our own context. So the Kena Upanishad concludes with a beautiful narrative, a beautiful story about Brahman and the divine beings. In this text, they are called the Devas. Just a word about Deva. So in terms of its root meaning, and we say technically its etymology, the word Deva comes from the Sanskrit root div, which means to shine, to shine. So Deva literally is a shining being, a being that has some extraordinary, manifests some extraordinary capacity. It suggests something which is supernatural in nature. So in this story, we encounter several devas, as we will see. The word deva sometimes is also translated as God, and because in our tradition there are many devas. The tradition is also mistakenly represented as one that teaches many gods. And again, the word God is not necessarily the best translation of Deva. But even within the Hindu tradition, when we want to speak about the Supreme, we always qualify Deva. So we would say Mahadeva. Yes, they are divine beings, but there is also Mahadeva. And when we use terms like that, they never have a plural form. So Mahadeva does not have a plural form because we want to emphasize the oneness or the singularity. So you can think of the words that are used to point to that one. So many words in Sanskrit and other Indian languages. Ishvara, Bhagavan, Parameshwara, as I said just now, Deva. So in that context, we're using Deva here as having plural, but doesn't mean but we should be careful about how we translate that word. It's been a source of a lot of misunderstanding. So in this, at the end of the Kena Upanishad, the teacher tells this story to his students that Brahman once won a victory for the Devas. The exact nature of this victory is not discussed in the text. Brahma devebhyo vijigye. We can again, fill in the blanks, and we can assume that the text is talking about one of the many mythological battles. This is a familiar story between Devas and Asuras, and perhaps that's the background of this story. So, though the victory, Kena Upanishad says, was clearly because of Brahman. Brahman was the ultimate source of their victory. These Devas claimed victory for themselves. They became arrogant and self-centered and rejoiced in this victory as though it was their victory. So they said, this victory is ours. This is our achievement. No one no one else. And the narrative continues that Tadaisham Vijagyao Tebhi. Brahman, of course, knew of their claims, of their understanding, and so wanted to help them, to teach them, to develop deeper wisdom and understanding, and so appeared before them. So keep in mind that this is a narrative, a story that the teacher is telling. Brahman appears before them as a Yaksha. Yaksha is an effulgent being, a shining being, came before them. And they did not know who this was. Kim idam Yakshamiti. They did not know who this Yaksha is. So Brahman knew of their arrogance and their conceit, appears before them as this marvelous being who they did not recognize. So the Devas consulted among themselves and thought it important because they do not like the fact that there is something that they don't know or someone that they don't recognize. So they discussed it among themselves and they decided that they would make an effort to ascertain who this Yaksha is. So they discussed and they chose Agni Deva, the Deva of light or the Deva of fire, if you wish, Agni, to approach this Yaksha, this mysterious being, and to find out who this being is. Agni agreed and moved quickly toward the Yaksha, full of confidence in his abilities. Before Agni could speak to the Yaksha spoke to Agni and asked, "Who are you?" An interesting question. He asked, "Who are you?" Even before the Yaksha could ask, before Agni could ask the Yaksha, "Who are you?" the Yaksha says, "Who are you?" And full of himself, and surprised, that he is not known and recognized by someone else. He says, "I'm Agni. I'm also called Jata Veda, the omniscient one." It's interesting how he introduces himself as though, "How could you not know me?" So the Yaksha does not comment on that introduction, but then asks Agni, what power do you have? What is your special power? Kim Vidyam. What is your strength, distinguishing, unique ability? And of course, Agni answers, with great confidence and loudness, that I can burn anything existing on this earth. Deheyam yadidam pritivyamiti. Whatever exists on this earth, I can destroy it. This is my ability. This is my power. I can burn anything. So without responding again to Agni, the Yaksha picked up a blade of grass and placed it before Agni and asked Agni, requested Agni, Tasmai Trinam, this blade of grass, I want you to burn. Single blade of grass. No problem, Agni thought. Agni rushed towards it with all speed, all power, wondering why such a simple task is given to me, but was unable to burn it, could not ignite it even. Immediately, the Agni's interaction with the Yaksha comes to an end. He returned immediately to the other devas and admitted his inability not to burn the grass, doesn't tell them what happened, but simply says that I could not recognize Vigyatum yad etat yaksham iti, that I can't know. I do not know who this yaksha is. Interesting again. All the elements of the story are interesting. It doesn't say what exercise the yaksha gave. So then they said, okay, why don't you go, Vayu? You try. You go. And same words are repeated in the text, so I'm just summarizing. Vayu says, okay, I will try. I'm sure I can find out who this yaksha is. So Vayu goes. Before Vayu can introduce himself, yaksha says, who are you? He also gives a long and eloquent introduction. I am Vayu. I am Matarishwan. Just as Agni says, I am Jata Veda. He says, I am Matarishwan. I move everywhere. Yaksha says, okay, what is your unique strength? What power resides in you? I can blow away anything on earth. Yadidam prithvyam iti. Whatever is there, whatever object, there's no object heavy, too heavy that I can't move from its location. Yaksha does not reply, but Yaksha puts before Vayu a same blade of grass. Tasmai trinam, a blade of grass, and asked him to blow it away. And the Upanishad says that Vayu dashed against it with all his power, with all his might, but was unable to move it. Without adding anything further, Vayu returned to the divine beings, to the devas. Not again. No one spoke about what happened, what the interaction was, but just said, I could not find out also who is this luminous being, this luminous spirit. So there is only one deva left, and this is the Lord of the Devas, Indra Deva. So they asked Indra himself to go forward and identify this yaksha. So Indra goes towards the yaksha. Indra goes forward, and Indra seeks to find out who, in an effort to find out who the spirit is. But then something interesting happens when Indra goes, very different from the experience of the others. What happens? Indra approaches the yaksha, and before Indra could speak, the yaksha disappears from Indra's sight. And in the yaksha's place appears a beautiful young woman. And she speaks to Indra. Sa brahmeti hovacha. Brahmano va etad vijaye. Mahi vadvamiti tato haiva. Vidanchakara brahmeti. Sa brahmeti. Very simple words. It is Brahman indeed. It is through Brahman that your victory was attained. And so from her words, Indra learned that it was Brahman. The luminous spirit was Brahman. The text identifies the woman as Uma Hemavati, Uma, the daughter of the mountains, which is a name, as you know, used for the goddess Parvati. So it is through Brahman, and through Brahman's victory that you attained greatness, you attained victory. So Indra then understood that this mysterious spirit was none other than Brahman, who made their victory possible. What a what a narrative. It is seen better in the context of the Kena Upanishad, but we could, on the basis of all that we have learned, we can certainly draw deep lessons from it. This encounter, now we will reflect upon, between Brahman and the Devas reveals many important, offers many important insights, but fundamentally, it is a narrative about untruth and arrogance. Untruth and arrogance, asatyam and ahankara. The Devas claimed a credit for a victory that was attained because of or through Brahman. And they became arrogant as a consequence of this false understanding. So even they are devas, they are, divine beings. And so that even for the divine beings, they are also susceptible to certain kinds of moral weaknesses, moral temptations. In this case, the temptation of arrogance. So Brahman's appearance in the narrative before them was meant to help them understand that the victory they claim was impossible without Brahman, and because of which they ought to be humble. So the consequence of untruth is arrogance. The consequence of truth is humility. His famous line in Bhagavad Gita, Vidya Vinaya Sampanna. One who knows the truth is always rich in Vinaya, in humility. That, I think, is one of the fundamental insights of the narrative, but there are many deeper points here. In the Hindu tradition, Brahman, as we know in the teachings of the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and other texts, Brahman is the source of all existence, the source of all life, of all that exists. And in describing how the diverse universe emerges from this one Brahman, Advitiyam Brahman, the text usually give a certain sequence beginning from the great elements, Akasha, Vayu, Agni, Apa, Prithvi, in other words, space, air, fire, water, and earth. These are the 5 great elements emerging from Brahman. And then from these great elements, the world of the diverse world emerges. But in Hindu cosmology, each element, this is where the Hindu tradition has deep insights about the interconnectedness of all things, and the interconnectedness of the great elements, the Pancha Mahabhutas they are called, the 5 great elements, and our own bodies. Our own bodies are nothing but various combinations of the Pancha Mahabhutas. So what the text does is, it first of all regards each of the 5 elements as a deva, and associates particular elements with particular sense organs in the body. Particular elements are connected with particular sense organs. In the description, each sense organ is described as being formed predominantly. All the elements are present in each organ, but there's a predominance of one element in each sense organ related to the function of that particular organ. So space is connected with the capacity to hear Akasha. For the eye, fire or Agni, because I mean, the phenomenon of seeing requires light, so it's a connection between light and eyes. The sense of taste is connected with water. You know, again, there are good underlying reasons, you know, because if the tongue is not moist, we don't taste anything. You know, we all speak colloquially about, you know, my tongue is dry and I can't taste anything. So taste is associated with water, and water with the organ of taste. Vayu, or the air, you know, when air blows, we feel it. So it's connected with the skin or touch. The earth is connected with the sense of smell, or the nostrils, because it's really, as I understand, it's only when particles move in the atmosphere that you can smell these. So there were good underlying reasons. And then the lord of the senses is the mind. Without the active mind, the mind is the, you know, backs up the senses. So the mind is associated here with Indra. Indra, the lord of the divine beings, is so you think of the macrocosmic and the microcosmic. This is what the text is: relationship between the macro and the micro. So Indra, lord of the senses, is associated here with the mind that is necessary for the functioning of the sense. If the mind is not attentive, you don't hear, you don't see, even though something might be in front of you. If your mind is, you know, is depressed, you don't taste, you may not even smell. So keeping that in mind, therefore, this text is making a similar point as we saw in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, that the senses depend on the great elements and on the mind, but the sense organs and the mind are not capable of functioning unless there is consciousness, Atman, present in the body, Brahman present in the body as the light of consciousness. So the eyes do not really see, they are the instruments of seeing. They do not see in the absence of this conscious reality. Again, so many beautiful verses, Kena Upanishad, you know, that which the eyes cannot see, but because of which the eyes see. You know, the eyes are instruments, like the pair of glasses that I wear. If I took my glasses out and held them at the side, the glasses don't see. They require to be backed up by consciousness, which is light, which is the source of all seeing. So in the absence of the seer, the glasses may be good instruments, but there is no seeing. And the same way you can go on to speak about hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, all of which require the presence of this this consciousness, which is Brahman, present in the body as Atman. This is the essence of life, making all activities possible. So this is the point here. This narrative aims to help us appreciate this fact. And this is what the Devas, Agni, Vayu, Indra did not understand. So let us deepen the reflection a little more. Does it mean that, you know, as human beings, we should not claim any achievements to be our own, or not take pride in our own accomplishments or achievements? I don't think that's the point of the narrative. The point here is that the point of this the narrative is not to lead to self-deprecation or, you know, to look down upon one's one's abilities or one's hard work or one's accomplishments. It depends on how we view our accomplishments, our achievements. So we have, with Brahman's blessings, we have bodies with certain capacities. We have the gift of sense organs. We have the gift of minds. We have the gift of physical bodies, all through the grace of the divine. And it is our responsibility to cultivate these gifts, to develop these gifts to the best of our abilities. But at the same time, we are not the creators of the body. We are not the creators of the sense organs. We are not the creators of the minds. These are received. We are receivers of these gifts. And whatever accomplishments we may attain in life through our own hard work and dedicated work, we celebrate. It's not wrong to celebrate those accomplishments, but it is also good to recognize and truthful to recognize the source, the ultimate source of those accomplishments. We exercise our freedom and our initiative in using and developing our gifts, but not in creating these. So to become a successful singer, for example, one must go through, or dancer, take whatever it is, a medical doctor, a scientist, an IT specialist, requires many, many years of arduous training and practice. But certainly one needs a voice. One needs, flexible limbs. And when one is aware of that the ultimate source of all of this is Brahman, this is Brahman's prasada, this is Brahman's grace, then the celebration of achievements can never become an act of arrogance. It's always tempered by humility. So in this story, we may assume that Brahman is not demanding, that all victories should be attained, should be attributed to me, but inviting us to consider the truthfulness of the fact that all our accomplishments are possible because of a more fundamental gift, a gift that has its source in the divine. So when we understand this truth, then this truth leads naturally to humility. Let us say, for example, that you don't even look to Brahman as the ultimate source of, the body, the mind, the sense organs, which you use to attain success in life. Then minimally, we should all acknowledge that our successes in life, our accomplishments in life, our achievements in life are also the consequence of countless other human beings, starting with ancestors, parents, teachers, a community, all of whom played vital roles in any success that we achieve. Success is never a solitary effort. Even though, we use the phrase, and we use it too often, that he or she is a self-made person. Nobody is self-made. It's false. It is false. We cannot be human outside of a community of humans. We don't even have the gift of language with which we think, the symbol system with which we think outside of a community of language. We are all indebted to the teachers. This is why in the Hindu tradition we have the 5 great yajnas, Panchamaha yajnas, reminding us of what is really underlying this story, the necessity for humility in our relationships, our indebtedness to ancestors, to parents, to teachers, to spouses, to friends, to strangers, to the world of nature. We are, using the word of the Vedas, we live in rinam. We are indebted beings. To conclude, there is so much more. As I said, I know we've heard this before, but there's always something new to learn. One of the great insights of this story also is, even though Brahman was right before them, as Brahman always is, because we never separate from Brahman, as the Devas. Brahman was standing before them in the story. They could not recognize Brahman. They needed help. And the help came from this beautiful woman who said, this is Brahman, there is Brahman, this is Brahman. And everything that you do is ultimately grounded in Brahman. Brahman is the source of all of your capacities and power. So they needed help. We can read that also. Brahman stands before them, but they're in a condition of avidya, of ignorance, like us. The divine is always with us. We never separate from the divine, but there is the reality of avidya as a human problem. And the overcoming of avidya, the wisdom, the knowledge that we need for the overcoming of avidya is the knowledge that we receive from the teacher through the Sruti, through the sacred teaching. And it's interesting that's a woman, because Sruti is feminine. Knowledge in the Hindu tradition, the words that we have for knowledge, Vidya, Sruti, are all feminine nouns. So this story at the end of Kena Upanishad is also a powerful reminder, of the tradition of teaching, the Sruti. Someone has to speak the Sruti to us. Uma speaks the Sruti, is the Sruti, speaks the words of the Sruti to Indra and said, this is Brahman. It is Brahman who was standing before you. And then alone Indra recognized that this is Brahman. So arrogance as a view of oneself or as an attitude to others is problematic. It is untruthful. It is untruthful because it is a failure to understand the divine as the source of our abilities and as a sustainer of life in the mind and the body. Second, arrogance also causes blindness to our own shortcomings, leads us to believe that we are without limits, as Agni and Vayu taught. It stunts our growth. It leaves no room for any kind of growth, whether it's intellectual growth, it's ethical growth, it's spiritual growth, because we don't see any need for it. The exaggeration of one's abilities, in a paradoxical way, leads to those abilities being underdeveloped and doesn't promote their flourishing. People who underestimate themselves and people who overestimate themselves don't realize the fullness of their potential. Both underestimating, both extremes. That's why I'm saying that in reading this narrative, it is not that one should not take pride in one's accomplishments. This is not the point. But that pride in one's accomplishment can be beautifully tempered with humility. And third, finally, arrogance also results in increased interpersonal friction, which is what the Brihadaranyaka story was reminding us of. By overestimating our own abilities and achievements, we also tend to underestimate the accomplishments and abilities of others. So overestimation of oneself always leads to underestimation of others. We exaggerate our own achievements and we demean whatever it is, whether it's the limitations or the faults of others. So in our presence, others always feel diminished without self-worth. We don't affirm others, and such attitudes are not conducive in both stories to building relationships of love, relationships of trust in families, communities, in nations, in the world. So many beautiful lessons in this story, but I will stop here and then invite your comments before we conclude this morning. Thank you very much.
Anand, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Couple of comments. I'm very happy that you selected that dialogue between Uma and all other gods who were present at that time. We needed a woman to straighten them out in the start of the new year. So I'm glad that she straightened you out. So you need someone like that in your life to keep you in the right place. Number two is what you are emphasizing is with all the hard work that you put in and the activities get done through you, we always have to remember the karta, the real doer is Brahman.
Yes.
And that's exactly what Sri Krishna in the 10th chapter talks about, Vibhuti Yoga.
Yes.
All the glory of all the good things is there, is nothing but Brahman. And the third point I want to make is, when we do the puja, I remember you coming there with a video recording about the performing the puja in our house, remember?
Many years ago, yes.
Yeah. And at that time, when we do the prasad at the end, the things that we utter are very significant. When you're offering the prasad, what we say, Om Pranaya Swaha, Om Apanaya Swaha, Om Vyanaya Swaha, Om Udanaya Swaha, Om Samanaya Swaha, Om Brahmane Swaha.
Yes.
At the same time, even though we talk about Panchapran, even when we're making the offerings, we offer at the end Brahmane Swaha, because all the words are insufficient to describe Brahman, as our Swami Dayananda used to teach us. That this cannot be described by words. So even when we are describing the Panchapranas as we are making the offerings, it just cannot be completed prasad unless you round it off by adding Brahmane at the same time. So that's how we sing at the same prasad.
Yes.
That's all the comments I want to make.
Shashi, thank you so much. I mean, there was so much in what you have said, and these are very beautiful comments. And I want to lift up what you have said, because I think in these insights, especially when bringing in the traditional Hindu rituals, they're so beautiful, and they have deep expressions of wisdom in them as well. This is it. But sometimes, Shashi, when the rituals are done so quickly and in a very hasty manner, and these words that you quoted, when the prasad is offering, exactly. So it's offered to each of the pranas, but Brahmane, which is exactly what we're seeing in the Kena and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. This is why rituals are very beautiful. I join you in saying that, we should never, and sometimes you find that attitude, a sort of a derogatory attitude to, I'm not interested in rituals, I'm interested in wisdom. But the rituals are infused, as I think this is the point you are lifting up. Rituals are so deeply infused with this Upanishadic Bhagavad Gita perspective that we should be very mindful. I think your point is, when we perform the rituals, we have much to learn. We should be very mindful. So I thank you very much for bringing that dimension to the discussion.
And I think other thing is, Anand, what I was emphasizing also is, it is the responsibility of the person who's performing the puja to explain to the audience as to what you're performing.
Yes, exactly. That's always very, very helpful. Yeah, thank you, Shashi. That really enriches our perspective this morning. Any other comments from Satsangis?
When Shashi Dada mentioned about these rituals, also it came to mind what you alluded to about nobody is self-made, and we owe it to our ancestors and to the community. And this really dawned on me when in 2020, when my father passed away, I conducted his last rites, and this was the first time that I had to personally be part of those rituals. I had never seen them up close until that time. But that was when I saw that the rituals involve invoking and paying homage to 3 generations prior.
Yes.
During the thing, and it makes so much sense that we have not seen those ancestors, but their efforts have led us to where we are today and what we are doing. So I think it was such a brilliant inclusion of those rituals, in our tradition,
Yes.
that unless we pay attention, we would never know why it is there.
Yes. Yes, no, Madhvi, this is very, very, very true. And you cite now a different kind of ritual where this point is made. And, we sadly, Madhvi, our culture today has become so individualistic in nature. We take delight in saying, I don't owe anybody anything. I have accomplished everything on my own. We think that's a very great statement when somebody makes that, but that is asatya. It is just not true. That's why I'm trying to connect arrogance with untruth, and you showed how so beautifully, even those generations that we don't even know or we don't even see, we are enjoying their gifts and their blessings today. So that's really, thank you for that. It's a very important comment. Yes.
Yeah. May I speak? This is Naina.
Then
Hi. I just wanted to also, I feel the same thing that Madhvi feels, that, for a long time now, I have thought to myself, I've never won a lottery in my life, but I have already hit the jackpot when it comes to my ancestors and my parents and all the teachers and including you and Dr. Sane and Dr. Kumar. We all should feel blessed that we have these opportunities, that why were we so lucky? Why are other people not equally lucky, etc.? So, there's always that, but I really feel exactly what you were saying, that none of us are self-made. We are part of a village. And that's what has brought us to this point. So beautifully said. But I do have one question. You just kind of touched on the issue of, you did the Pancha Prana. And then you talked about Pancha Yagnas. But, yes. And I know I've heard this lecture before, but it just slips my mind for some reason what they are. Is it something you're going to talk about in future?
I will quickly mention, when I mention, you will remember. And then, exactly, as Shashi said, and as Madhvi mentioned, how interdependent we are for our own well-being. And so so the truth is the truth that we are all dependent beings in an interdependent world. We don't, as you said, we don't achieve anything completely by ourselves. So then, if we understand this, there are certain moral obligations. How do we live out this truth? And that's where the Pancha Mahayagnas is. So the truth of dependence expresses itself in a life of obligation. We have obligations because our lives are enriched so much. And so we have obligations to the divine, and we're speaking here about, it's called Brahma Yajna. We have obligations to teachers, Rishi Yajnas, by supporting. We could think today in contemporary ways, how do we fulfill those obligations? We support education institutions, we support learning, but because we have benefited from learning. So we have, and then Pitri Yajna, Madhvi spoke about Pitri Yajna. How do we express our indebtedness to our ancestors? By caring for the living ones, by offering prayer for those who are departed, by taking care of the elderly in our communities. And then we have, all of these are so beautiful. We have Bhuta Yajna, the elements. The Hindu vision of the universe is not anthropocentric, it's not human-centered, because we are also recipients of the blessings of clean water, of the air, of heat and all of that. We have an obligation to care for these to be good stewards, good ecological stewards in Bhuta Yajna. And then, of course, Nara Yajna, other human beings, all other human beings. Think of, those who grow our food and those who make our clothing. So we speak of 5, and these are 5 primary, there may be more others. So these are reminders of when we recognize the truth of our interdependence, what do? Then we live a life of giving and the 5 Pancha Mahayajnas. And our calendar also has moments to help us remember. In the fall, we have the 2-week Pitrapaksha, just dedicated to focusing on our indebtedness to generations that have gone beyond us, the generation elderly in our midst. Kavindra, you had your hands. I just saw your hand up.
Yes, Namaste Guruji. Namaste, first of all, your discourse today, I thought it was pretty thought-provoking. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I just had a question about a point you had raised earlier. Maybe not a point, but maybe a passing comment you had earlier that kind of stuck with me. When you were discussing the word deva and how it's usually translated in English and how it's usually perceived, because as a young-ish person growing up in the U.S., having to go to history class, social studies class, and people always say Hinduism is polytheistic. They believe in 330 million gods, and it's always been at odds with what my own personal understanding of Hinduism is. Just in terms of that specific word deva, what would be some alternative translations or maybe some alternative understandings of how we perceive that word in relation to how we understand also the idea of Brahman as well?
As I said, yes, thank you for lifting up, because it's a really problem, in the understanding of our tradition. Because, we, as we already commented on today, everything comes from the divine. Everything is divine gift. So it is appropriate to, and we express the recognition of everything, including the world of nature, as divine gift, as prasada, to use the word that Dr. Sani used this morning. Prasada is not only, it includes what we receive after we perform puja, but prasada is, in a general sense, recognition of the world as divine gift. And so, in order to express an appreciation of the world as divine gift, we tend to name things in the world as deva. So the blessings of heat and fire, Agni Deva. There's something sacred about Agni that we want to recognize and lift up. And to do that, we say Agni Deva. There's something sacred about water that we want to lift up and to recognize, and we say Vayu Deva. So in order to recognize something as sacred and as gift, we would describe it as Deva. So in the Hindu tradition, clearly, you could have multiple devas. So in a sense, what we have is like polytheism is a really problematic word. If we have to coin a word, we'll say we have polydevataism, but not polytheism. We have polydevatas. But at the same time, you can have that with one single divine being, Mahadeva, Bhagavan, Ishvara. Why it is difficult? Because it's different in so many ways from what other traditions would propose. For the one, we have always been open to the reality of many names and many forms. The infinite one has infinite names and infinite forms. We don't insist on a single name and a single form. So I think, I translated, going back to the root of Deva, as you recollect, I said it comes from div, shining. So I said a Deva is a resplendent or shining being. But the Deva is not Ishvara. Deva is subservient to Mahadeva, to Ishvara. And I think that's what we have to explain. That's how we have to communicate and to explain ourselves. And I say, I'm not saying, Hinduism is monotheistic because, we want to become like other traditions that are monotheistic. I think it is when we speak of the one, that is the teaching. When Sri Krishna says, Pita ahamasya jagata mata dhata pitamaha. I am the mother of the universe. I am the father. I am the grandfather. I am the one. It's one source. That's what we have to lift up. But we always have to say, but in our tradition, that one may be called by many names and be visualized, imagined in many forms. The attitude of the Hindu tradition is pluralistic in its disposition to the nature of God. It takes a little explanation, but if someone wants to understand, they also have to invest the time, Kavindra, in understanding a tradition that is different in so many ways from other traditions. We can't explain ourselves by collapsing our understanding into other understanding. We explain ourselves by highlighting the uniqueness of our worldview. That's in that way we enrich other traditions, also by being faithful to our tradition. Arvind, please.
I have no Anant, can I break in for 1 second?
Yes.
But I think I remember the same question asked to Swami Dayananda once. And his answer was succinct. And he said, in our faith tradition, we don't have many gods. We don't have one God. We have only God. There are not many gods. There's not one God. There's only God. The entire creation, whether it is alive or not, is divine. So then you can count as many as you want. So that was, I thought, a profound answer that still stuck in my head. What he taught is only God.
Yeah. A very deeper answer to the question.
Exactly.
We can go first to Ekam and then we say only Ekam.
Exactly.
Thank you, Shashi. Arvind.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rambachan and Dr. Sane, for beautiful answers. I really appreciated the differentiation that you made between the prana and the Atman, which is the prana of the prana. Yeah. And also reminding us that we're not the doer. And even though things happen through us, it's the Brahman that's doing through us. But could you, maybe if not today, or maybe you already did in the past and I missed it, elaborate on our power of choice? Because, if two farmers, I'm just thinking this example in my head, two farmers maybe in the same area, have the same similar land, have the same sunshine, have the same weather, maybe same set of seeds, one could grow a tremendously good crop and one could ruin the crop by making bad choices. So we all have choices, and that is why we need to come to satsangs and listen so that we can make the better choices. Because even though God is there for all of us, there is a responsibility given to each one of us to choose. And that is why we need to be enlightened so we can make the better choices. So could you elaborate on the power of choice and where does that fall in the spectrum of the divine work versus what's happening?
Thank you, Arvindji. It's a very good question. And as you've said, probably requires a full discussion sometime maybe. Dr. Sani, when you pick up again, you can take up this question and discuss it in all of its ramifications. But I think very briefly today, Arvindji, because you've already in some ways answered it. I think that the whole of the Hindu tradition is predicated on this gift of choice that we have. And I think, we can connect what you are saying, with, because there's so many misunderstandings also of Hindu teachings about choice, and especially in regard to teachings of karma. I think when we think of it, I think with karma, there are two fundamental things to be understood, and they come to your question. One is that humans, we have the gift of choice. Secondly, choices are consequential. This is your point. The choices we make a difference. We have the gift of choice, and choices are consequential. That's the second point. And the third point is that the consequences of our choices are not always immediately discernible, but they will come, they will materialize. That's why the responsibility, as you put it, for choice is such a important and significant one, because your choices will produce consequences. And sometimes we think, oh no, because we don't always immediately see the consequences. But as the seed example is good. You put a seed and it doesn't immediately sprout, but in the right conditions, it will sprout. And that's true, Arvindji, not only where we have to expand our thinking today, it is not only in the individual realm, it is in the realm of communities also. Community choices, world choices. So if think of the big predicament we are facing, Arvindji, with climate change, right? Which is a consequence of global choices about fuel and consumption, right? And it's a good example because the consequences have been incremental. Now we are seeing them in more, in more significant ways. We didn't bother about them because we didn't see the consequences. But as you said, there are always consequences. Whether we can reverse them, this is what we're discussing. Hopefully we can. But I think that's a good illustration of the fundamental principle of karma that you are lifting up. So we have to think of it individually, but we have to apply it now socially, and certainly globally. I think there is something profound to learn there, and to teach children about responsibility, about choices and consequences, about the long-term consequences of choices. So thank you for that. And it's a brief answer to an excellent question. Let us conclude now and with